We are still studying about the Ten Commandments. Moses is still stuck up on top of that mountain, and God is writing the Ten Commandments. We are on commandment number 5, and that commandment is, honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long upon the earth. And this is the only one of the Ten Commandments that is actually an if-then statement. If you honor your father and mother, then your days will be long upon the earth. And though I believe that applies to the individual, I think it even more applies to the society. If the society insists that children honor their parents, it fulfills the predetermined laws of nature that God has that makes a nation live longer. Interfering in that relationship between parent and child shortens a nation's life. And so it is important that we honor our parents. Now, the Bible never tells adults to obey their parents. It does tell children to obey their parents. It's very specific on that. But adults don't have to obey their parents. They must honor them for their whole lives. And those are not the same thing. Once you become an adult, you are answerable to God. You're not answerable to me anymore. It's between you and God. I'm the middleman, and I'm cut out once you become an adult. But you still have to honor your parent. You bring honor to their name. The Bible has very strict penalties for those who mistreat their parents. If you curse your parent under the Mosaic law, you were stoned to death. So God meant it when he said to honor your parents. The family unit is the foundation of the church. It is the foundation of the culture. And that is based on children honoring their parents. Unfortunately, a lot of cultures that have government schools, any culture that has government schools, replaces the parents with the teachers, and the siblings with the classmates. And the loyalty goes to the school and the government instead of to the family. And that's probably the greatest problem with the government schools. It disrupts and breaks apart the family God created, that he wants held together. So it is very important that we honor our parents, and that parents strive to be honorable, to be worthy to be honored. We all mess up. None of us are perfect and deserve the kind of honor God deserves, of course. But we should be obeyed because God told our children to obey us. And if we don't make them obey us, we are letting our kids sin and getting them in trouble with God. So it's a heavy burden for a parent. And I'm talking, a lot of this is more to you older ones. I've got older children scattered, adult children scattered throughout. Joshua's good kid, he obeys. He's a good kid. This kind of, okay, yes, all of you are good kids. And honestly, even though you're adults, you all still generally do what I tell you to. So, but, okay, let's change. Maintaining the family unit and the parents' influence over the children is actually where our Thanksgiving came from. Because the Pilgrims were a group of people in England who, they read their Bibles and they believed God wanted them to worship in a certain way. But the king said you had to worship the way he wanted you to worship. And he had his official churches, and if you were caught worshiping outside his official churches, you were in trouble. So they all moved to Holland. And we're actually not usually taught that in school, but they moved to Holland. And they lived in Holland, but the laws in Holland were such that even if you were a doctor or a lawyer or extremely well educated, you had to work as a day laborer if you weren't a citizen of Holland. And so they couldn't earn enough money to afford to homeschool their kids, which was actually the most common method of education, or to send their kids to private schools that taught their religion. They had religious freedom in Holland, but they didn't have financial freedom. So their children had to go to the local charity schools. Charity schools are run by churches, and all the local churches were from the official Holland religion. They were free to worship in other churches, but all the schools were teaching the official Holland religion, and the children were beginning to act like the native Dutch people. And so the Pilgrims had this problem. They could stay in Holland and have all their kids grow up separated from them, though living in the same home, apart from them, apart from their beliefs. They could go back to England and go to jail, or they could find an alternative, and God led them to an alternative.
Too well for them.
It didn't at first, especially, go too well for them. They rented a boat and it leaked. So they rented another boat and they got in it and they set sail in the Speedwell for America. But the Speedwell didn't. It began to leak, so they had to go back to England. They all got into the sister ship, the Mayflower, and then took the 6-week voyage in the ship. I should have looked up the size of the Mayflower. I believe it was smaller than this.
Just very small.
It was very small. It was smaller than this building. And they all crowded in that, and they took the 6-week voyage to America. But God had his hand on them. They didn't land where they were supposed to land. Where they landed, they got off. There was this beautiful village site that obviously no one was living in. So they moved on to it, and they were busy building their houses. And an Indian walked into their town. He walked up to the town leaders and he said, "You got some beer?" And dysentery was a problem. Beer and wine killed dysentery germs, and a lot of people enjoy beer anyway. So they gave him a beer. He didn't know a lot of English, but he came back the next day with his friend. I believe his name was Samoset. I forget which one was Samoset. Okay. His friend Samoset. Samoset knew English real good, because one day Samoset had gone on a boat with a bunch of English fishermen, and he spent 2 years on a boat with English fishermen, so he spoke English real good. He told the Pilgrims the land they were building their houses on is the land his village he had grown up in had been built on. But that smallpox had killed his entire village. When he got back from gallivanting around with the fishermen, all his people were dead. So by our law tradition, he was the owner of that land. He not only approved of them living on that land, he stayed there with them, and he taught them how to plant corn and beans and squash, and how to eat turkeys, how to fish there, instead of the way you fish in England, how you fish in America. He taught them how to pop the corn, and that's where popcorn comes from. Yeah, but they didn't do that in England. And he's a big reason that they survived. So at the end of the year, only half of them had died. Now that sounds a lot to us. Only half of them. Jamestown colony, more than 3/4 of them had died. So half of the Pilgrims dying from disease was actually extremely good compared to what other colonies had done. So they had food. Because of Samoset's help, they had enough food, they would be able to get through the winter without starving to death. And they were thankful to God. So they invited the local Indians that were friendly, that Samoset had been living with, invited their chief to come to their celebration, because how they were going to thank God was they were going to have a party. And he showed up with 30 braves, and every woman there said, "I didn't cook enough food." Thankfully, they brought their own. They brought deer and turkeys and more popcorn, and they had a 3-day party, playing games and running races and celebrating as a way to thank God for all he had blessed them with. And that is the first American Thanksgiving, and where our tradition dates back. There are years we didn't have official Thanksgivings, but that is what our tradition dates back to, was that celebration that God had so abundantly provided for them. And He had provided for us. We are spoiled rich. And God just blesses us abundantly and beyond measure. So, that's our Thanksgiving, and let's sing our song. I've got peace like a river, I've got peace like a river, I've got peace like a river in my soul. I've got peace like a river, I've got peace like a river, I've got peace like a river in my soul.